Hello, it's a real pleasure to be with you today at Open Banking Week. I am Huy Nguyen Trieu, co-founder of CFTE, calling from London. Today, I'll be telling you about the iPhone and what the iPhone can teach us about the future of banking. So first, let me tell you, where I'm coming from. And today I'll wear three different hats. The first one, my finance hat, as a former managing director at Citi and other financial institutions. Secondly, my telecom hat. So I wasn't born as a banker, actually. I used to be CEO of a tech startup in the US, and one of the things that we did was mobile app. And finally, my third hat will be as a specialist in business models, which I teach at different institutions like Oxford or CFTE, and as a co-program director of the specialization Open Banking and Platforms in Finance. So why am I talking about the iPhone? Because I think that a lot of the questions we're asking ourselves in finance today, actually, we already saw that in telecoms a long time ago. All those questions about what is the strategy to take? What is the value chain? Who's going to be creating value? Who's going to be capturing value? All of those kind of questions, we've seen that in the telecom industry, which is also an industry with very large incumbents that have a lot of money and which is very heavily regulated. So definitely a lot of lessons which we could perhaps apply to financial services. So first, the iPhone. Why are we talking about the iPhone and why is it important? I think you all know that the iPhone, dominant player with 25% of market share in the smartphone market, 200 million units sold in 2020, that make $140 billion of revenues for Apple. And it's not just about the iPhone, it's the whole ecosystem that they have. For example, $23 billion of revenues for the AirPod, which is more than Netflix and Uber combined. So very, very big. The iPhone is very clearly a very big player in the smartphone market. But if we go back 12 years to 2008, actually, Nokia was also very big in 2008. If we look at the numbers for Nokia, they didn't have 25% of market share. They have 50% of market share of the whole handset industry. They sold 450 million units. They had 80% of market share of the whole smartphone market. At some points, they even reached $250 billion, making it the largest company in Europe. What's the lesson that we can have from that? I think here's a lesson of disruption. And it's not that you are a large company that makes a lot of money, that you can't underestimate the speed and violence of disruption. I think that's one of the lessons, but actually that's not the main lesson that I wanted to share with you today about the iPhone. No, that's one lesson and clearly a lesson for all incumbents from all industries, but there's much more that we can learn from the iPhone. I think the iPhone is really important because in the telecom industry, it accelerated innovation. It led to things that didn't exist before, which is hyperscalability. New players were built because of the iPhone, and new ways of making money were created. So let's have a look at all of this. First one, acceleration of innovation. And let's look at the mobile app market. In 2008, there were mobile apps, actually. There were 10,000, which is not a lot, actually. It took 5 years to go from 0 to 10,000 apps. And you had two main ways of creating mobile apps. One on Symbian, which is this joint venture between, Nokia, Sony Ericsson, Samsung, which I knew really well. I almost went to work for them. And Research in Motion of BlackBerry. There were not that many mobile apps, actually. And why is that? Mainly for two reasons. First is that as a mobile app developer, it was a nightmare. Creating a mobile app for Symbian, very, very clunky, very long process. You didn't have one Symbian, but you had 4 different Symbians. So a very long, painful process to create a mobile app. And once you've created a mobile app, you couldn't even distribute it. there wasn't a place, there wasn't an app store where consumers could go and find your mobile app. So long process to create a mobile app. And at the same time, once you've created a mobile app, it was really difficult to distribute it. Today, do you know how many mobile apps there are? Actually, there's 1,000 times more, 9 million mobile apps, which have been created and mainly put on top of iOS, so Apple, Android, Google, and some of the Chinese platforms like Huawei, for example. What has changed? How come that we have so many mobile apps today? What has changed is really those two things, which is for a mobile app developer, it's much easier today to create a mobile app. In a few days, you can create a mobile app for iOS or for Android. And not only can you create a mobile app for iOS or Android, you have a market. You can very easily distribute them, and you will have hundreds of millions, actually billions of users who can find your mobile app directly on the App Store or on Google Play. So what we have seen is that it's not the iPhone, actually, it's the platform, the operating system, the whole ecosystem that helps basically the whole mobile industry to innovate much, much, much faster. So from very, very little innovation that was mainly driven by the handset manufacturers in 2008, we moved into a world where iOS and Android basically facilitated that innovation. And now we have the whole ecosystem which can innovate much, much faster. So huge acceleration of innovation. This acceleration of innovation led to what I call hyperscalability. That means companies that could grow extremely rapidly on top of those platforms. So if you look at the fastest growing companies in the world, they're all mobile companies. TikTok, for example, 1 billion users after 3 years. WeChat, WhatsApp, Instagram, all those companies are companies that grew extremely quickly on top of those platforms. If we go deeper into the example of WhatsApp acquired by Facebook for $19 billion. And when they were acquired, they only had 50 employees. And if I remember correctly, almost 500 million users already. So what we see is that the barrier to entry actually became much, much, much lower. So we saw much more innovation, but at the same time, we saw much more innovation that led to companies that could grow extremely rapidly, that could scale extremely rapidly, because they had access to the whole ecosystem that helped them to grow. So much more innovation that led to companies that could grow much, much faster. What did it mean for the whole landscape? What did it mean for the players in the mobile industry? So in 2008, two big type of players. First, the mobile operators. Orange, for example, Vodafone, China Mobile, Telefonica, the big networks, basically, that were providing the infrastructure and access to the network. On top of that, the handset manufacturers that were providing the handsets, but also the operating system and also the apps. Biggest by far, Nokia, then Samsung, Sony Ericsson, Research in Motion, LG, Motorola. 6 big ones that were pretty much dominating the space. What do you think is the landscape for the mobile industry in 2020? So of course, you still have handset manufacturers, but the landscape here is totally different. Out of the 6 big ones, 5 are totally insignificant or went bankrupt. 1 is still there, Samsung. A few other ones appeared, mainly Chinese manufacturers, Xiaomi, Oppo, Huawei. But of course, this presentation is about the iPhone. So the iPhone, very big handset manufacturers. But actually, it's much more than that. We've had operating system. And Apple today is a dominant player, both in terms of providing the handset, the iPhone, and the operating system, iOS. Next to Apple, we also have Google. So Google also provides the operating system through Android and also creates handsets. So we've seen that handset manufacturers, actually, quite a few of them became insignificant. One remained, a few other ones appeared, but a very, very big one came on top of its operating system. But we have more than that, actually. What we have is also apps, mobile apps. And if you have a think, what do you think are the largest mobile apps in the world today? So actually, there's quite a few. There's quite a few. TikTok, for example, makes 500 millions of revenues. Another one, Tinder, also makes 500 million of revenues. YouTube makes 500 million of revenues. But actually, they are not the biggest ones. Do you know which are the biggest mobile apps today? They are, of course, gaming apps. And you have at least 6, PUBG, Pokemon Go, others that makes actually $1 billion of revenues each. So what we've seen is that there's much, much more today. There's mobile operator, handset manufacturers, but also operating system, mobile apps, all of that going to the consumer. So how can we summarize what the iPhone brought to the mobile industry? I think if there's one word, that's platform, as in the platform business model. And let's take a step back in terms of definition, so we can all discuss about the same definitions. We normally talk about platform business model when we compare it to a vertically integrated organization. So a vertically integrated organization is an organization that does everything end to end, from raw material to manufacturing, distribution, customer service, consumers, etc. Which is totally different from a platform, where a platform basically connects producers to consumers. And some of the largest companies in the world today are platforms, from Facebook to Google to Apple, for example. So if we look at the mobile industry, this is exactly what happened. The mobile industry used to be an industry that was totally vertically integrated. For handset manufacturers, that took the raw material, went to manufacturing, developed the software, distribution, and sold it to the consumers. Below this, you had the infrastructure, the mobile networks, which was there. Today, the mobile network is still there also. But the mobile industry is totally different. The mobile industry today is composed of mobile platforms, the iOS, the Google, the Android, that provide the ecosystem, the tools, the operating system, the governance that links the app developers to the consumers. What about the legacy? What about the incumbents? The handset manufacturers are still there, actually. One of them managed to do well, Samsung. 5 of them didn't do that well. And then on top of that, you had a few other ones, but one that did extremely well, of course, the provider of the platform, iPhone. What about the business model? Who makes money today in telecoms? So who used to make money before? Very simple. The mobile network made a lot of money, $800 billion. And the handset manufacturers made $70 billion in 2008. The last 12 years, mobile operators, so the infrastructure has continued to grow slowly but surely. $800 billion went to $1 trillion 12 years later. What about the handset manufacturers? Actually, we can't really talk about the handset manufacturers anymore because it's really about the mobile platform. And the whole platform ecosystem today makes much, much more, makes $300 billion plus compared to 70 billion only for the handset manufacturers. So as an industry, the mobile industry is much, much bigger today. It's much bigger. There's much more players in the industry who make much more money. The bad news, that's the problem of being in an office with light. So I was saying, 12 years later, the mobile industry is much, much bigger today. It's at least 5 times bigger than it was, and there's much more players in the industry, from those who are providing the platform to the handset manufacturers to the mobile apps. So a much, much bigger industry. Of course, it's not necessarily good news for the legacy handset manufacturers, for the incumbent handset manufacturers, because only one of them managed to do well, and 5 of them became insignificant. So now, what about finance? Finance also has different pieces of infrastructures. It could be, the payment rails. It could be, others. But largely, finance used to be a vertically integrated industry where you have banks, insurance companies, and that pretty much do everything end to end. Today, actually, it's moving into a platform industry. Why? So you have much more through the conference, but just to summarize, a few different reasons. Regulations, could be open banking, PSD2, others. Secondly, technology, API, cloud. Consumer behavior, how consumers are changing their behaviors and want much more transparency. And on top of that, new entrants, of course, tech companies getting into financial services. And so what about the finance industry? The finance industry is clearly also moving into a platform business model. The question, of course, is what is the role of bank and insurers? And will it be the same as what we've seen before for handset manufacturers, or will it be different? There's nothing that says that banks or insurers cannot be in the middle of the platform or could be at the level of producers. Who else could be in the middle of the platform? Of course, some of the tech companies, which we see already through, in China, through the Alipay, Ant, WeChat, etc. Some of the fintech startups, Starling Bank or others, Plaid, Tink, others, and who could be the producers? Here could be thousands of companies, from fintech startups to others. So if there was a conclusion that we could have from what we've seen in telecoms, is that the business model of platform will very significantly transform financial services, similarly to what we have seen in telecoms. That will lead to much, much more innovation, hyper scalability. So we will see companies that will grow much, much faster in financial services. That will lead to new players. And that will, of course, also lead to new business models, so new ways of making money in financial services. And perhaps actually, I will slightly change this. I won't say the business model of platform will significantly transform financial services. I will say the business model of platform is already significantly transforming financial services. And I will finish on this last slide for you, which shows the 10 largest financial institutions in the world 10 years ago, and they were all banks. If you compare to the 10 largest financial institutions in the world today by market capitalization, 5 of them are banks, but 5 of them are platforms. So I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. The platform business model has definitely already entered into financial services. There's much that we can learn from the world of telecom, but if there was one conclusion for me, it's that the world of financial services is likely to be much more interesting and much more exciting in the next few years. So best wishes for all your projects in the space. Thank you very much.